Hello, friends, and welcome to What the Fringe, the podcast dedicated to all things Fringe theater. I'm your host, Lauren Hantz. Each week, I visit with a Fringe artist to hear all about their endeavors and gain insight into their process. This week, I'm visiting with Carnegie Hall of Delusions and Grandeur. The Australian Arts Review describes the cello clown show Delusions and Grandeur as irreverent as it is poignant. This classical cello recital plays out like a piece of performance art run by a master jester, blurring artistry, humanity, and insanity. Featuring Suite No. 1 in G major by J.S. Bach and personal comedic pieces crafted in idiot classes, Karen fuses in a healthy dose of pathos, tackling identity, expectations, and success through the eyes of a fool. Delusions and Grandeur has won multiple awards, including the Tour Ready Award at the San Diego Fringe, the Broadwater Award at the Hollywood Fringe, and was nominated for Best Spoken Word and Storytelling at the Sydney Fringe. The show has received numerous accolades from outlets such as Everything Theatre UK, Sydney Arts Guide, the Alternative Gig Melbourne, Stir Vancouver, the Sydney Morning Herald, Sydney's The Age, and Time Out Melbourne.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, I'm at Fringe because nowhere will program me. I have to program myself. And yes, I am a very trained clown. And yes, I am a very trained cellist. And yes, I am a very trained comedian. Do you have a venue for me? Because I can't get one. So I'm in this yoga studio pretending it's a concert hall.
Karen boasts a diverse resume, having graced the stages of Carnegie Hall and the Hollywood Bowl to behind-the-scenes work in the studio sessions for everything from indie singer-songwriter albums to work on soundtracks for Emmy-nominated shows. In addition to performing in multiple commercials and TV shows, Karen most visibly spent 4 seasons on camera as the cellist on the TV show Glee. When she's not being a serious classical musician, Karen can be found being ridiculous, improvising, and clowning on various comedy stages around Los Angeles. She has studied at Del Arte International, the Clown School, Groundlings, Second City, and trained in idiot, red nose, and jester work. Her solo show, Delusions and Grandeur, has toured globally, winning awards and critical acclaim from audiences everywhere. In addition to her busy performance career, Karen has over 20 years of experience in education. She frequently works as a teaching artist in residency for the Music Center of Los Angeles and maintains a private cello studio. Karen, welcome to What the Fringe.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to have you here today. So you and I met at the Denver Fringe in 24, and we just kind of started up a conversation, and I got to know you as, I like this chick. She's super cool. And then you started telling me about some of your marketing strategies, and I was like, not only is this chick cool, she knows what she is doing. And I got to see your show. It was funny and poignant and heartwarming and heartbreaking and kind of all the things that I like to see in a show. And I loved it. And I know that your cello playing is definitely worth the ticket price. But for me, as a non-music person, your opening bit, just the opening of the show, is worth every penny of a ticket price. It's a fantastic clowning. And I love it.
It is a very popular bit. If you're anyone who hasn't seen the show, I eat a 6-inch Subway sandwich in about 6 minutes, 6 inches in 6 minutes. I didn't really want to put it in the show because I have to eat a freaking sandwich at the beginning of every show and then perform for an hour after inhaling this thing. There was a lot of uproar that I hadn't put it in the workshop versions of the show. Everyone's like, where's sandwich? And I was like, well, I don't really want to eat a sandwich. And they're like, but that's your voice, that's your bit. And I was like, okay, maybe. And they're like, we want sandwich. So I put it in, and it's mentioned in every press writing, comments on it. People want to comment on a YouTube video. It's usually where's the sandwich bit? And I'm like, okay, it's just not in this 10-minute promo clip. It is what people want.
We want the sandwich.
Give the people what they want.
Well, yeah, that's totally... Is it brave? I don't know. That you eat a whole sandwich and then you, like you said, you perform for an hour. That's insane. I don't like to eat before I perform.
People tell me they're 3 hours before a show, I can't eat anything. And I'm like, I don't know. For me, it makes me a less nervous cellist. Yeah, it sets the tone of there's no real fourth while, I do it as a cold open. So it is really fun to play that shift from like, oh yeah, we're just hanging out. No, we're not just hanging out.
You're going to see something amazing.
You're about to hear a classical cello recital. I don't get nervous so much anymore. But in the early days, I would be like, oh my God, I'm going to get up there and I'm going to play solo Bach. But I would be like, visualization, sports psychology tells us a lot about the power of visualization. They'd be like, just visualize what you have to do. And the moment I could visualize myself just like, I'm just going to sit and eat my sandwich, the rest would take care of itself. If I could just visualize that moment of like, I'm just going to get on stage, take a bite, and say something to somebody, then it was like nothing else, everything else fills itself in after that first bite.
You've built a really beautiful way for you to enter into a show and be ready, and it's very fun for the audience. And it's funny because like you are this very accomplished cellist, and the fact that we get to sit in these rooms and hear you play up close is really, really spectacular. It's a really fun show and melding of art forms and just very, very, very exciting. So we've talked a little bit about your work as a cellist. I read some there in your bio, but just give us a really tiny hot take on your career.
2 pianist parents, started piano when I was like 3, nose at the keyboard. Started cello in 3rd grade and never stopped. Thought I would stop at certain points possibly and just never did. Worked in LA, have been a working professional in LA for getting close to 20 years now. And it's a roller coaster of a journey in LA being freelance. My favorite place to be is in a pit orchestra. I just love it there. I get to be both a healthy mix of soloist and team player and kind of out of sight, which is odd for a performer, but I like the pit. And I think I reached a point, though, where I was just really exhausted of waiting for other people to give me an opportunity. And I thought, if I can build a little something around my name, that would be potentially long-term beneficial, because I'm aging out of the hot girl cello gigs. There are now definitely girls younger and hotter than me. It's just a fact of life. Everybody's like, you're still young, you're still beautiful. Thank you. But the truth of the matter is there are 20-something-year-old cello players out there now who look 20-something, and I am in my late 30s. So time only goes one way. And, I was like, well, let's just, not depend, not look back, not say what if, not say I want. Let's make something happen. Let's play the music I love to play. Let's be the type of performer I love to be. And let's just get it moving. I still get to play symphonies. I still get to play in pits. I still get to play fun casuals, which is like when you do a wedding or a corporate event or something, that isn't classical and formal. And I just get to sight read music with other players. And, I did a couple Christmas gigs while I was in LA, and I was like, let's play Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. It's just fun. But I think that if I had a life dependent on waiting for those gigs to come instead of planning my own, I think I would be stressed again. So it's a good balance now.
It's really interesting as a musician. A lot of us here at What the Fringe listeners are performing people. We understand the performing world. So much is based on how you look because they're casting a part, because they have a vision of what they see. And it's so interesting that you say that, well, I've passed my hot girl cello phase. And I remember you talking about that when I first met you, of being put on a gig because of the way you looked. I mean, yeah, sure, she's a great cello player, but she's hot too. And I just find that so interesting. I guess it shouldn't surprise me that that's prevalent in the music world, but it is fascinating. What has been some of those experiences like, in that kind of world?
Probably negative. I mean, yeah, there is an aesthetic. And, I used to have a commercial agent, and I booked some commercials and things, and I did some hair modeling and things like that. So I think there was always an understanding of they are casting an aesthetic, but in the music world, it's a bit hidden. So, at least you get an acting breakdown and they tell you for better or for worse what they want. Or you see a modeling breakdown and you're like, well, I'm not a size 2, so I'm out. There's things that felt more transparent. And in the music world, it felt very behind the scenes. So that was difficult for me to be like, oh, this isn't about talent. This isn't about blending in. I didn't handle it well in my 20s for a variety of reasons, which that's a whole other episode. Partially just me not having the skill set. There's a reason I love the world of the jester. I am not afraid to say something. And sometimes that comes back to bite me because I will label the injustice that I see. I've gotten better at it, but I think I am not a person afraid of my voice. I didn't know how to use it. And unfortunately, it's always gendered. There are always going to be things that pop up and you're like, wow, I bet you if I had a penis, this would not be an issue. Nobody would say that I sounded condescending. They would say that I was experienced, which I am. I'm in a phase of my life now where I'm not afraid to claim my strengths and offer my expertise. And I have to remind myself constantly that other people are bringing their paradigms into it. And some people will welcome what I have, and some people will be put off by what I have. And I can only control the way that I deliver the information. So I strive to clean my side of the street and say things with tact and care and give to those willing to receive, but not stew. I'll still stew, but have somebody that you trust, I have a very close music friend, a very close clown friend. I have a couple mentors or trusted females in this space. But also making sure that they giving them permission to set a boundary and be like, if you feel like this is getting gossipy or impacting your ability to work with someone, you just tell me that it's not what you can hold right now. Have somebody that you can tell.
These are reasons why I love you. All the things that you're saying, I'm like, this is why I like this chick. She's so great. So you're talking about making, a way for yourself, other avenues. And so how did you go from cello to clowning? They both start with a C. I don't know. What drove you to sign up for your first clown class and be like, this is the way forward?
Yeah, well, I started doing improv and sketch first. I had a cello. I played the cello on Glee. I played a cello on a commercial. I ended up having to sign with an agent. The agent said, take some improv. I took some improv and fell in love. Then someone in the improv school was like, there's this weird indie improv team that does a little bit of clowning, physical comedy work. They always have a musician sit in with them. Do you want to get connected? I got connected. I hated it. Oh, I was so stiff. They were like, why aren't you having fun? And I was like, I have to be the best cello player that there is, so much self-imposed pressure of if you're on stage with a cello, you must be good cello player. The end. They're like, you're really funny when you don't have the cello. We've seen you improvise. We've seen your sketches. You're witty, you're funny, you're fast. What's going wrong when we get the cello? And I was like, wow, that's a good question. But I know that what you're telling me is true. So I'm not afraid of, I don't like it, but I'm not afraid of, I think that's maybe something else that I like about myself is that if I say a hard truth, I will hear a hard truth. And I think it's Brene Brown talks about you can't accept the hard truth from anybody. It has to be someone who's earned the right to give you the hard truth. And I've been playing with this clown duo for a while. So, directors, teachers, friends, they should give you the hard truths and you should be willing to be like, oh, okay. Yeah, I see that. And so I was like, well, let's look at this. Why am I miserable and stiff and not funny when I get the cello on stage? And then I took a clown workshop because they'd had a guest sit in and she offered a free workshop in LA, asked me to come and bring my cello. I never got the cello out, but I did a clown exercise and I sobbed I sobbed and I snotted and people laughed at me and I kept sobbing. I wasn't like, oh, let's hide this. And then for like the next 3 weeks, I was like, I can do anything. Like I was on such an invincibility high of being like, that's most people's nightmare, to be laughed at when you are feeling sad. And I felt so empowered because nobody said, stop crying, it's not that bad. It's just like a very typical parental response to a child who is upset, and something that I heard many times in my childhood. So it was like a really true coming back to the inner child, which is the clown. The clown is just, you know, the innocent inner child. And so I was hooked, and I was hooked big time. And now I've studied just about like every form of clowning you can imagine in some context. And I shifted a bit from like the freelance cello world also into the world of education. I'd say for most, my early career in my 20s, it was probably like 70% performing, 30% teaching. And I think it switched to about 50-50. And then it probably went to about 70% teaching, 30% performing to fund a clown habit with a more regular budget.
This is what we have to do, the things we have to do.
And now that I'm touring, it's like 80% performing and about 20% educational. So moved again.
So you've had some, like you've just said, some extensive clowning training. And in your bio, we talked about idiot, red nose, and jester clowning. I am very new to the clowning world. The United States, I think, in the whole is pretty new to the clowning performance art. And talk to us about the difference between, just briefly, those three types of clowning.
Oh, how can I be brief when I talk about clown theory? It's my favorite. Well, I will say I've studied a lot more than just those three. I mentioned those three in the show kind of as a bit of press damage control, because in LA, when I put up my show, a lot of people in Los Angeles have come through what we have here that's called like the Idiot School. And the Idiot School was started by John Gilkey, who was a Cirque du Soleil clown-like figure. Sometimes he calls himself a clown, sometimes he doesn't. He's just a master of physicality, juggling, just a great eye for stage picture. And so he had this group, What the Hippo, and the Idiot School kind of started. And the idea of the idiot is just like, it's in the world of the bouffon, on that side of the clown tree. I kind of have that word just because those are the classes where I developed some of these pieces, the rough drafts of them that went into some of the show. But it's like, can you be doing something physically stupid and saying something very wise, or can you be doing something very beautiful while saying something just absolute complete nonsense, like a monologue on the color blue, you know, whatever it is, just something so silly. And what truths kind of come through that juxtaposition. And so that's the idiot. Just like, I got nothing wise to say, but somehow wisdom is still coming from what I'm blathering on about. Then Red Nose, when I went to Australia, was a lot of what, I mean, people were like, I just felt like every interview was a bit of damage control, because they would be like, do you like pretend to trip with your cello? Like, do you have a nose? Is your face painted? And I was like, no, but like, I've trained in those things, you know, like I balance my bow on my finger. Like that's parlor trick balancing is like one of the first things you learn, you know? So like I have some of those skill sets in my wheelhouse. They're just not on display in this show. And then Jester, I don't even think that I knew my show was Jester until I finally took a Jester class. And then I was like, oh, this is what I am in this show, pretty directly. The jester, if you think about the court jester in like the early, you know, like let's say like even the Roman Empire or whatever, it's somebody whose job is to like be witty in the moment, have a quick kind of retort or question, The jester's always living on the line. Like he wants to keep the masses happy, or if he makes the people too happy, right, says too many, like the king is fat, and the people are like, oh my God, yeah, the king is fat. Like we hate him, Now, like the king is risking like, oh, there's a mob, like I don't want the mob to come after me and like my wealth and opulence. So like I got to kill the jester, so the jester has strayed too far into the path of the people. Or then if the jester panders to the king too much, the crowd will be like, the jester's just telling the king whatever he wants to hear. Kill the jester. We hate him. And to like appease the masses once again, the king will kill the jester. So the jester, like, is kind of on this tightrope of like speaking truth to power. Like, what am I saying? Is it pissing them off? Is it making them think? Have I won them back? Am I keeping the powers that be happy enough? Like, so I think my show kind of toes that line of being like, like I'm clearly appeasing the powers of the classical music world. I play good classical cello. Like I honor the craft. I've done my time.
Thanks for unpacking that for us. And you kind of got into your show a little bit into kind of the depths of it. The story is about kind of like what I recall, just the journey of an artist was what I felt, and the ups and the downs of it, and really resonated with me. So what led you to tell this particular story?
I marinated on this story for years. Like I didn't know how it would exist, because the clown, my definition of clown, we're not talking about the other side of the tree, which is like the satirical buffoon or jester, but the actual clown, and why I still say this show has roots in clown, is the clown has to hope. Therefore, the clown has to fail. You can't hope if everything's going good for you. Something has to go wrong for you. So the clown has to hope. Therefore, the clown has to fail. And it has to reveal to the audience their feelings about it in the process. How do you deal with failure if you must try again? And you can be an angry clown and still try again. The root of that anger is still the hope that the next time it's going to go right. So there's always that sense of like, why am I going back? Because that's insanity. So the clown always has to be hopeful. And I didn't know how to fail at the cello. I didn't want it. I mean, I do, but like, I didn't want it to become a shtick where like I pretended I was bad at the cello, or like a very classic clown bit is the interruption, like something's just not quite right. So you're always delaying the doing of the thing, and that can be a great way to communicate hope. Like you're just hoping that you're going to finally get to that thing, but you keep getting interrupted, but the mission is always the same. So it became, how do I demonstrate that I am skilled at this craft without making it a shtick or an excuse? And that was really difficult. And then through the pandemic, the thoughts that you fear were, at least for me, allowed. What if the work doesn't come back? Then I actually am a has-been. I used to be a cellist because cello is no longer a profession I can have because the world can no longer gather. Like what if, and then it was like, oh, well, maybe I've always felt that way a little bit. Maybe I am worried that like 4 seasons on Glee is like the best steady union job and paycheck with residuals that I'm ever going to get. Maybe. So then if that's true, like what else is true? What other fears have I made true in my mind, or have I suppressed in my body, or whatever it is? And because of the pandemic, they kind of had permission to be said. And I have a pretty strict philosophy in my clown play and teaching, which is the stage will ask everything of you. And it's your job to be boundaried in that request. If you're doing the work right, you will find those access points into things you love and things you fear and things you hate, and do that in a class. Don't do that in front of an audience. Once I can name it, then I can play with it. It's very important to me that I don't play with anything before it's been named. So I can look back and be like, oh, a lot of Delusions was marinating. Nothing had been named yet. And then once I hit the pandemic and fractured my tailbone and went through a tailspin of life, things started to get named, and then they started to get processed. And then all of a sudden, like, I could have opinions on them and I could play with them. So I see a lot of the show grew out of that. I tell a very sad story in the middle of the show about why I started playing the cello. That came up in a class, and it was the first time that the stage truly got away from me. I just got too sad. It was like, there's a point of the story where I usually stop. Oh, why did you play the cello? Oh, I had a neighbor down the street. She was popular. I thought if I played the cello, I'd be popular too. End of story. And if you watch the show and the story goes on, the story doesn't end happy and popular and joyful. So, those sorts of things will come out of you. And then you get choices about how you deliver them, how you cue the audience into knowing that you're okay, that you're not stewing in sadness, that you're still guiding them. A lot of the times it's physical cues. I had to develop a physical game in telling that story, which kind of subconsciously signals to the audience that, like, I'm not lost in my grief, that I'm still in movement. So therefore I'm still guiding, so that nobody gets left in those states of being as they map their own story or as they care about the performer or whatever it is. So yeah, that's sort of, how the show grew. And then it came together very quickly. Once I got the name Delusions and Grandeur, I was like, oh, got it.
Absolutely. Well, it's a beautiful show. Let's talk real briefly about marketing, which was one thing that drew me to you. You have a very specific audience that you are aware of, and you have really unique ways of kind of reaching out to them. So talk to me real briefly about your audience and how you learned who your audience was at Fringe, because I remember you sharing that with me and I was like, that was not what I thought. And it was light bulbs went off in my brain.
I still feel a little funny talking about marketing because I'm not always sure how people find me. I was fortunate enough at one festival that there was like a retired marketing professor in my audience, and he has offered me free advice and mentoring and input. And there are a couple of things he'll say, which is have a thing. First of all, he's like, you have to have a thing to put in somebody's hand, which is weird. My capitalist brain is always like, well, I don't want to waste things. That was something that I had to think a lot about, but that's part of it. Every festival, I think I approach a little bit different, but I do very targeted emails to people in the community that I think would show up. It's not like who you think it is. Like, I can't just email the cello section of a symphony and be like, hey, come on out. They, like me, don't want to. Like, if it's your night off, I'm not usually eager to go hear someone else play cello music. It's just not high on my list, especially if they don't have like a name recognition point. But if you email like a board member, they will usually come. Like, find out who's head of the symphony marketing or programming and make it a lower down assistant, not the head, somebody like that. And they will then usually see it. I do have a lot of confidence in my product. Like, I know it is a polished show. I'm not, now that I have workshopped a new show, I recognize like you have to have something to go. So I know that I have a polished show. So usually they'll come, they'll see that it's a polished show, and then they'll tell their network of people that they know, which are the musicians who I do want in the audience. So they'll start to text their friends. So it's kind of finding access points. Usually a cello teacher will be a little more inclined to come. I'll admit, in Sydney, I was really thrown off. There were a lot of young girls who came with their moms to see my show. And I was like, what are you doing here? It's usually a lot of boomers in my audience who are like, well, let's see the cello show. Other tips for marketing that I've learned is don't be afraid of your face. People buy from people. Have a presentable or emotionally geared photo of yourself. I love my photo of myself. The photographer at one of the Fringe festivals who's like hired by the festival came up to me and he was like, my only thought going into your show was I hope she's as good a player as her photo makes me think she might be. Like, because the photo looks like I know what I'm doing, but like you don't get a lot of people. It's Fringe. Come on. Like you get insane things happening at Fringe. You cannot know what you're walking into. Like I could just be like a hobbyist who happened to get a nice shot,
Because really, how many classically trained musicians are doing Fringe, which is what makes your show so interesting. Like you are so skilled at that art form and then so skilled in clowning. Like it's really special.
Oh God, I had a reviewer in Australia who was like, she seemed almost upset that she was in a theater watching a musical focused piece. And she's like, have you done your show for musicians? And I was like, yeah, sometimes. And she's like, because that's who it belongs for. And in the review, she literally was like, this show is better suited to a classical audience. She didn't say anything bad. She just seemed to be kind of upset that she didn't understand why my show was in a theater. And then I tried to get into a musical venue in Melbourne and they refused me. They were like, we don't program comedy. And I was like, oh my gosh, like read this review from Canberra. They're just tearing me apart for not being in a musical venue, Yeah, I tell people all the time, I'm like, I'm at Fringe because nowhere will program me. I have to program myself. And yes, I am a very trained clown. And yes, I am a very trained cellist. And yes, I am a very trained comedian. Do you have a venue for me? Because like I can't get one. So I'm in this yoga studio pretending it's a concert hall and people come and it is a word of mouth show. That is something I know very strongly. Like I cannot turn a profit if I have 3 or fewer shows. I can almost turn a profit now with 3 shows. I would say I can, but it has to be in a supported venue. Sometimes I busk. Sometimes I'll play my cello places like farmers markets or things like that so that people can grab a postcard or whatever. Targeted media, again, some festivals make it easier than others to contact media. Depends on the size of the town and the size of the festival. Sometimes you just get lucky and sometimes you have no luck at all. Like in Edmonton, I didn't have a single bit of media. No media came to my show in Edmonton, and that was a little surprising, but I had 8 shows and my last 4 sold out. So, it's really hit or miss as far as like what's in your control.
That's some fantastic advice. Well, on our last note, I always like to end my episodes with a fun story. So tell me, what has been your most interesting or awkward or just some fun little story, Fringe interaction that you've had that you want to share with our community?
My first festival, I had no idea what I was doing. And I showed up. I had 8.5 by 11 pages, right, that I printed at FedEx for my posters, but it was 2 on each. So it was like split, right? And I was so self-conscious about like how big my face was already. And I just remember getting to the venue and they had like everybody's 11 by 17 posters up. But then also on the tables, right, are everybody's little postcards. So like my posters are too big for the tables and too small for the wall. And I came back the next day and they'd had to hang 3 of my tiny posters to fill the space. And I was so self-conscious. And then like 2 weeks later, I went to my second festival and like the volunteers had to coach me on how to give people my postcards. I didn't know. Like I would talk to people in line and then come back to the volunteer table. I was volunteering, just trying to talk to anybody because I was so terrified about talking to people. And the volunteer who was like running the venue was like, did you tell them about your show? And I said, well, they're here to see someone else. He was like, he handed me one of my own postcards and he was like, go give them this postcard and tell them you had a show. You have one. And I was like, okay. So I like walk over and I was like, I have a show at the Fringe too. This is my postcard, and I like hand it to them. And the guy says, oh yeah, I saw it on a pre-festival picks list. And I was like, what? He was like, yeah, there was like an article about like top show picks for the Fringe. You're on it. And I was like, I am? And I like come back and I was like, he said he'd heard about my show. And he was like, that's great. Did you tell him your first show sold out? And I was like, no. And he was like, did you tell him that tickets are moving fast and you should buy some? And I was like, of course not, so he's like shouting at the patron in line and he's like, her first show sold out. You probably want to get a ticket. And I just like, I don't know. It's just like how little you know at the beginning. And I sometimes feel like it's dumb luck. I recognize that I'm skilled. Like some people have tried to, make me feel a little bad about it and be like, well, the cello gets people into your show. And I was like, yeah, I've played it for more than 30 years. So like, I'll take whatever bump I can get from that. But I do recognize that I am awkward and struggle to invite people to see it while simultaneously loving it and really wanting people to be in the room to experience it.
Yep, that is the struggle for sure. Karen, thank you so much for joining us today on What the Fringe. It's been such a delight to hear about your process and your perspective on your art and the art forms that you are so skilled at. And it was just really cool to have you here.
Thank you.
Karen's show, Delusions and Grandeur, will be playing at the Adelaide Fringe at the Ayers House Governor's Room, February 26th through March 22nd, at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, at the Motley Bull House, March 24th through April 1st. And then Karen will be making her Edinburgh Fringe debut with Delusions and Grandeur this August. And Karen's newest clown show, Noise Pollution, will have its world premiere at the San Diego International Fringe Festival this May. To learn more about Karen Hall, visit her website, inforthelonghall.com, and keep up with her on Instagram and Facebook at inforthelonghall. What the Fringe is produced and hosted by me, Lauren Hantz. This episode was edited by Ben Ellis of Renowned Media. Those sweet tunes you hear are provided by Paul Snyder of Orchestra of Sound, and our logo was designed by Ruby Arnold of Ruby Makes Things. What the Fringe can be found on your favorite podcast platforms and now on YouTube. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know when new episodes release. Keep up with What the Fringe on Instagram at whatthefringe_productions and find us online at whatthefringeproductions.com. And if you're like me and you hate to eat before your show, then after your show, you find yourself ravaged and will eat the first thing you can get your hands on. You find that food and you're like,
I eat a 6-inch Subway sandwich in about 6 minutes, 6 inches in 6 minutes.